We are Gold Ivy, a health company dedicated to simplifying health and wellness. Tune in as we search to find the deep, real, and raw truth. We're here to talk big, no room for small talk. It is our mission to inspire, seek growth, simplify the action steps, and build confidence.
You decide what works for your daily life and how to transform our lessons into your gold. Are you ready to step into your power? Now is the time. Join us on the fearless pursuit of self-discovery and growth.
This is Ivy Unleashed,
a Gold Ivy production.
If you struggle with digestion, energy, bloat, acne, mood, fatigue, listen up. I spent 4 years, 50 plus doctors, and tens of thousands of dollars to heal my gut so you don't have to. I've created the what to do guide I wish I had before spending years navigating the overwhelming amount of information and conflicting doctors' opinions out in the gut health world. My help, I can't figure out what's wrong with me, the How to Heal Your Gut Starter Kit is now available, and the response to it online has been incredible. On top of what I wish I would have known, I also wish this information would have been easily accessible for me. Because of that, it's available to you on the shop page of our website for only $9.99. Included in my guide is what helped me and countless others heal their gut, along with chronic fatigue, acne, hormone imbalances, and so much more. You'll learn what foods to stay away from, what foods to eat, a 4-week gut healing eating plan, lifestyle tools to aid your healing process, and 2 of my go-to favorite recipes. So head over to our shop page on our website, goldivyhealthco.com, and remember, happy gut, happy life. You can heal. Let me help you. If you're a regular listener of the show, or you follow us on social media, you know I, Brooke, just ran my first marathon, and Andrea ran her 22nd state in her goal to run a marathon in every state. How did I go from barely getting out of bed to being able to run 26.2 miles? A customized training plan and coaching with Andrea. With my health concerns, it was important for me to make sure I crossed that finish line safely and confidently.
We are so excited to announce that we are now offering customized training plans. Whether you're wanting to run a 5K, 10K, half, or full marathon, we've got you covered. Get your customized training plan plus coaching to get you race ready and keep you motivated along the way. Prior to receiving your training plan, you will meet with me, Andrea, for a 15-minute call to discuss your goals, race details, and schedule your 3 coaching calls. You will receive a training plan for your race, tailored to your schedule, endurance, and cross-training preferences like yoga, biking, strength, or whatever movement you enjoy.
Coaching throughout your training will provide accountability, safety, and inspiration to keep you pursuing your training and race goals. With Andrea, you will connect your mind and body to maximize your race experience. And if you're looking for a custom training plan without coaching, we're offering that as well. Head over to the shop page on our website, goldivyhealthco.com, to learn more and get you across that finish line. Welcome back to Ivy Unleashed. We are continuing Mental Health Awareness Month. We're talking about a topic today that a lot of people asked us to cover.
Yes.
And we brought on an amazing woman that we are so excited to introduce you to. We are talking about traumatic brain injuries. And traumatic brain injury is a leading cause of death and disability among children and young adults in the United States. Each year, an estimated 1.5 million Americans sustain a TBI. That is wild.
Yeah. And just like in the past week, I've talked to 2 people that have asked, that I've just been, in our community with. They've been like, when are you going to cover traumatic brain injuries? And I'm like, actually, this week. So first of all, we want to welcome Kelly Sundby to Ivy Unleashed.
Hi, guys.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Kelly and I used to work together, and back in 2016, she's going to tell us all about her story, but she was working with me, and then all of a sudden she wasn't, and has a pretty intense story to share with everyone. So Kelly, would you share your story about how life was like before March 16th of 2016?
Oh, man. what was life like before. I think the biggest was I was the queen of hustle. I lived out in New York City. I was living the life of an actor out there. I had 17 jobs just to live there. I was on the go all the time. I did a ton of yoga. I worked out all the time. I ran all the time. I just was like really, I guess the word that I can think of is like really vibrant, right? I was like plugged in lots of ways. I've been that way most of my life. Like I've been interested in a wide variety of things most of my life, but I just was like on the go all the time. I mean, that was my life. It was just like go, 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 do all the time.
Yeah. And that's what I think of you as too, like very vibrant. You were always doing like commercials on top of health coaching, exercising, all kinds of things. Then all of a sudden you weren't at work anymore. And we got notified that there was a pretty bad accident. And so can you tell us what happened on March 16th of 2016?
Yeah. So, every year my dad is a St. Patrick's Day baby. And every year I try to bake him something. Ever since I've come back to Minneapolis from New York City, I would try to like bring something. I would bring a dessert. So I showed up at his house the night before because I was flying to New York City the next day. And I was living in Uptown. Like if you know the Minneapolis area, I was living in Uptown at the time. I was coming home from dropping off this dessert from my parents' house. And I was on Interstate 35W, which it's changed pretty dramatically now. But at that time, you would like come across 94 and come around the corner onto the 35W South. And, it was kind of hard to see around that bend. And so I came around and traffic had stopped. It was, rush hour traffic. And the person behind me came around the bend and didn't stop at all and hit me going 60 miles per hour. So he rear-ended me. Yeah, it was like really intense. So, what happened from there? He hit me. I was in total shock. I very vividly remember the person in front of me got out from his car and ran back to I will never forget this, ran back to my car and said, "Don't you move. You don't know if you're hurt. You sit in this car. I'm calling 911. And when you're in something that traumatic, like your body goes into fight or flight right away. Your adrenaline kicks in and it's just like you're not really functioning. So I just sat in that car. The police came. They asked me if I thought I could get out or if I needed an ambulance. And I didn't feel like I did at the time. And so I got out. And I mean, my whole rear end was crushed in. I mean, like all the way into my back seat. And I couldn't get a hold of anybody to come get me. And I was just like disoriented. And I remember they called a tow truck to take my car away. The sheriff repeatedly asked me, "Are you sure you don't want to transport? Are you sure you don't want to transport?" And I was right off of my exit. I mean, I was like, the next exit was mine to go home. And so he took me home. And I just remember walking into my apartment and I was living alone. And I sat on the couch and I was like, couldn't figure out what had just happened. My parents were unavailable. They had ended up going into a rehearsal that night. And then, so I called my two best friends and I was like, I think I should go in. Like, I don't know how I'm feeling right now, but like, I feel like I should probably get evaluated. I didn't hit my head, never hit my head in the accident. No like physical injuries that you could see, right? There was nothing that was like bleeding. I didn't break anything. I walked away from the scene. I went in and they said, "Oh, do you have a headache? Do you have these things?" I'm like, "Well, I don't know. By the way, pure adrenaline is coursing through my body, so I don't feel anything. You could ask me anything." I mean, really, I was like, "Yeah, no, I'm fine." Got on a plane the next day, flew to New York City, high. I mean, I'm just high on adrenaline, which is a natural response, right? I just didn't know. I had no idea. And I can remember very vividly, I had lived there for 4 years and I was seeing friends again, them asking me, "Kelly, like, are you sure you're okay? Like, I saw the picture of your car." And I was like, "I don't know. Yeah, I think I'm fine."
Did the airbag go off?
Mm-mm. So I learned, and something you may not know, if you are in a rear end collision, the airbags do not go off.
That's interesting.
That's messed up.
Yeah. Isn't that fascinating?
Should be any.
So where did your upper body go?
Yeah.
So basically, you know, I'm the driver. I had nobody else in the car. The seatbelt goes here. You know, the force of impact, right? So like that shaking, that like impact from somebody, you know, I'm fully stopped. He's hitting me going 60 miles an hour. You know, you imagine your brain's got to go somewhere, right? So like there is still some space in here, right? So the brain just went forward.
Your neck had to have like snapped.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have like chronic issues, you know, from that physically, just from the force of that. But what happened after that? I came back from New York City and realized like, I just don't feel right, you know? And I went to urgent care again. Urgent care is like, yeah, you're fine. It's like, we'll do an x-ray, but things look good. Okay. But I just felt, I couldn't describe it. I just knew that I didn't feel right. And I felt like I couldn't go back to work. I was just trying to kind of work from home, kind of give myself a little bit of a break. They were pretty supportive of that. Just like kind of take it easy, do your work. And it was a month after the accident that I finally went back into the office. And I was like, okay, like I should be feeling better by I'm probably good to go back. And I'll never forget, there was a coworker who looked at me and she said, Kelly, you're not right. Kelly, you're just not right. I was like, yeah, right. I was like foggy, couldn't make sense of things, couldn't remember anything. So that day I finally got in with my primary and she took one look at me and she's like, you have a concussion. There's no doubt in my mind you have a concussion. And that was the beginning of like getting a proper diagnosis, getting the therapies and the treatment, and crazy. I mean, it's crazy. I went to urgent care twice. No one did what they call a concussion protocol, which would kind of go through a checklist of things to look for. And nobody ever did that. I think what happened is they assumed that, oh, well, she didn't hit her head, so she's fine. And I didn't know, right? Mm-hmm. So I knew I wasn't right, but I didn't have the experience. I couldn't articulate what was wrong. I didn't have the words for it. I just knew that I didn't feel right. Mm-hmm. And that's all I could really say, you know? So I didn't have the wherewithal to go, oh, this is a concussion, because I, like many, believe you had to hit your head. I never hit my head. So how is that possible?
And had you have had a concussion before, like where you could have compared it to, right? So you had no point of comparison. You just knew I don't feel well. And when you can't really pinpoint those symptoms, how do you know? How's a doctor supposed to treat you? And then if on tests you look fine, definitely relate to that.
What did she say was like her clue looking at you that gave it away?
So my eyes, so they do a lot of neurological testing. They do a lot of testing of like the eyes and just to see how they're tracking, and they were not tracking together. So she could tell just from that. Your eyes, when you look at something, right, you should be able to keep your head still. And if the object is moving, track evenly. And I was unable to track evenly. It was that, and you'll see this sometimes when I talk, I have to think about what I'm trying to say. So it was like that cognitive delay of like trying to gather my thoughts was new for me. I'd never had that. I'd never experienced that, like this inability to figure out what I'm trying to say. She could tell by that. And then my balance was off. So I've done years and years and years of yoga, right? So, and balance is like a major aspect of yoga. And I couldn't even stand on 2 feet with my eyes closed and not wave like this.
Wow. So you get this diagnosis, you got a concussion. Then what? Does she send you home and says stay in a dark room for, the typical protocol of a concussion? But by this point, it had been a month since the accident. So what did that look like after this diagnosis of a concussion?
Yeah, she referred me to a neuropsychologist. And so they did further testing. They did what's called an impact test So it's basically a cognitive test they take directly post-concussion. It's basically a series of neurocognitive assessments. So they look at things like attention, your memory, your language, your reaction time, and your perception. You're sitting on a computer, which, by the way, if you've had a concussion, there's nothing worse than sitting in front of a screen. So if you want to like stimulate the trauma, let's go ahead and put her behind a screen in a bright room. Okay, good idea. Anyway.
Did they do that on purpose?
They have to.
So I asked, I was like, this room is not conducive to somebody who's had a brain injury. And honestly, what I found was if you haven't had it, you don't get it. So whether or not they fully realized that the room wasn't conducive, they probably maybe knew on paper, right? On paper, we know that like bright lights can, aggravate a brain injury, or sitting in front of a screen, right? We can know that on paper, but I'm going to need you to do this thing anyway because it's the room that we have. So It's, I don't know that it's intentional per se, right? But I just don't know that they understand enough to make it different.
That makes sense.
So interesting.
It's so messed up, though.
Yeah.
It makes me frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, my PT, to speak about like rooms where you shouldn't do PT when you have a brain injury, was right. There was a window that looked onto the interstate. So all you're seeing is cars going back and forth. And I'm like on a treadmill doing, some of the like testing that they wanted to do. And it's like, this is literally the worst thing I've ever done.
And where your accident was, so I feel like you're being re-traumatized in a way.
Like, let's just like aggravate the trauma. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so for me with the impact test, going back to like, what it is and how I failed it. So I have a background as an actor. I've mastered the art of memorizing copy, memorizing lines and memorizing copy. And the biggest red flag for me is I would sit down and they'd show me a word and I'd have to remember the word that I saw, right? That's what I've done for 20 years, 25 years. And so I have created a system as an actor to help myself remember that, right? So I would look at the word and I had no idea what I'd just seen because I couldn't rely on the systems I'd created for myself to I would create associations, right? So like if it's fly, I would say to myself like, okay, fly kite, right? That's how I remember. And I couldn't create that association anymore. And that was the biggest red flag for me, is that they'd show me these words and I was like, I had nothing. I had no idea what you just showed me.
How are you feeling during this? Because I can only imagine just your frustration. Also, like you just said, this is what you do. You're an actor, and now you just all of a sudden have this accident, and now you can't remember. So what was going on in your head during this other than, holy shit, I have a concussion. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, it was really confusing because at that point, I'd had an MRI, and the MRI showed that there was no bleed. So on paper, right? Like, well, then there's nothing wrong with me. What do you mean? So that was hard to understand. Like, how is it possible that like my brain isn't bleeding? So there's no way that I have an injury. Like, this is not possible. And I think it really scared me because when you have something that's like part of your identity, like this is who I've been for all these years. And these are the tools I've relied on to get me through. And now you can't. I think I was really frustrated, like you said, and scared and sad. Like, what does this mean for me? Like, what does this look like? I don't know that I went through all of that at that time, but I think I was so stunned that I just couldn't believe that was possible.
Yeah. Wow. So how many tests do they have you do? You do this impact test, you're sitting in front of a screen, and then is there like a physical test with, like you said, the tracking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, yes. So they'll use like a pen, or like they have this like stick that's got dots on it. It's similar to what they use at the eye doctor, and they have you track it different ways and, track it with one eye or the other eye. beyond that, in that office, when they like first diagnosed me, when I first worked with a neuropsychologist, I mean, I think that's really sort of all they did. But from that, they referred me to PT. And I did the traditional course of PT, concussion PT. And that's where they referred me to immediately.
Okay, good. Did you feel like, okay, I'm feeling heard, I'm feeling seen, like something's off, I'm not crazy? Or was it like, oh shoot, now I actually have to go do some work on this? Like, what was that like?
I think the whole thing at the beginning looked one way. And the reason I say that is I didn't have the language, or I didn't know what I didn't know, right? So I couldn't, not until I got into PT after I had this testing done, could I really understand like, oh, that's a deficit, and that's a deficit, and that's a deficit, and that's a deficit. Again, all I went back to was like, I don't feel right? But I didn't have the language or the understanding of like, well, what does that actually mean? Until I got into PT and we're testing these systems, and I'm like, oh, which by the way, when you're a high school athlete, they do a baseline test for this now. So, before you even start playing your sport, they do a baseline test. If you get an injury, you go back and they can tell you all the things that have changed. Well, I didn't have that luxury. So I had no baseline. My baseline is, I remember I could do this. I remember this was not hard for me, right? I think it took me like going through the PT and getting frustrated there for me to understand like, oh no, these are all the deficits that I'm seeing now. Got it.
What were some of those deficits and the systems you talk about?
So it's complicated. So when I did the traditional concussion PT route, I didn't get very far. I did a lot of it. My experience was like, if you have a concussion, you're all treated this way. We do this thing, this thing, this thing, and this thing, which sounds fine. Sounds like, okay, you have a concussion. These are the things that we do. But it's not, because we don't actually figure out what part of the brain was actually traumatized, was actually bruised or injured, and because if we're not that specific, we can do all these things, but they might not be affecting the brain positively. So, for example, what I experienced in that, the more traditional PT route is, let's really ramp up your system and figure out like what's affected, and then send you home. Like, what? I don't understand. So their whole philosophy was, let's really stimulate your brain. And the idea behind that is, when we really stimulate your brain, what we want to do is retrain your brain to be okay. Without any sort of like, let's calm the system, let's walk you down from that. It's like, no, we're just going to teach your brain that that's still okay. But that's not what happens, right? Like, your brain's not okay. Your brain's like, no, you just really messed me up. You just really inflamed me. And now I'm going to go home and I'm going to sleep for 3 days because I'm so overstimulated that I can't function in the world right now.
Why is that the process? It seems backwards. It seems completely backwards. It feels like you're training, you throw someone into marathon training before a 5K is what I'm kind of feeling.
Yeah. And I mean, that's exactly it. And again, right, I speak from my experience of like, I feel like we were all sort of treated the same, except my injury was my injury, right? So it's very specific to me. It's very, the part of my brain that was affected is specific to me. So by having this like blanket treatment, you're not actually addressing the underlying issue. You're just assuming that everybody's going to respond the same, which is virtually impossible, right? We're not going to, because we're all individual human beings with individual injuries. It's like impossible.
So how long did you do PT before you were like, no, this isn't it? Or did you graduate from PT and they were like, you're fine, go on? What did that look like?
Yeah, they graduated me. And, to their defense, right? I think I did feel like maybe I'm good. Maybe I'm okay. Maybe this is like, yeah, I think there was a part of me that was like, I think I'm okay, right? But there were lingering things, right? Like the fatigue, like I fatigue so easily, the cognitive delay, the inability to get back to a workout at the level that I was used to, or getting so exhausted at work because I'm looking at a screen all day, right? Like I couldn't complete my days. And so there were these things, right? But I was just like, over time, it'll get better. And they kind of believed that too, or at least like sent me off into the world that way, right? And so it was probably a year later, I still was like dealing with these things. And there's like a very, very real mental health aspect to brain injuries. I was suffering from depression. And it was like, I've had bouts of depression in my life, but for me, it's been, I know where that comes from, right? Like, I know what the source of that is, and I'm just gonna, like, I know that that's there and I'll move through it. But this was like a depression that would come and it would sit, and I didn't know what triggered it. I didn't know where it came from or why, and I couldn't move it, right? All I knew is that like, okay, someday this is gonna lift, and it will. That's all I could like rely on. I didn't like, I was just like, oh, okay, this is awful, but okay. So I think about a year later, I went back to the neuropsychologist and I was like, listen, like, I am not right. Like this, I can't go back to my life. Like, I can't do my job. I'm exhausted all the time. I can't do the things. I can't go back to acting. Like I still couldn't like, I couldn't memorize copy or I couldn't be like fresh on my feet like I used to be. And I was like, I'm just like not right. And literally she looked at me and she said, Kelly, I think you might be hanging on to this injury. And I was like, and this is our last appointment.
Hanging on to it like you want to hold on to your injury, like you want to have a problem?
Yep.
What?
Yeah.
Just like gaslighting you completely, just this isn't real?
And you know what? And I think it's because she didn't know what to do, right? Like, I think that her tools say, here, this is as far as you're going to go. And I was like, no, like, this is not my quality of life. Like, you are incorrect. This is our last appointment. No way. Like, this can't be true. And that sent me down a different road I went down the functional neurology route and looked at it from a totally different perspective.
Oh man, this is taking a turn. I'm so excited.
It's so funny that, for me, it was, I questioned the authority of the doctors. And that was when, oh no, they didn't like this. And you, God forbid, you know better than them, when it's my body and I know my body and how I feel. And so I went down the functional route as well. But the fact that there's a functional neurology route, like, I didn't know that was a thing. So let's get into it. What is that? What does that look like?
So functional neurology basically is like, it's like diagnosing which part of the brain was impacted, rehabbing it without pharmaceuticals or surgery. So they look at it from a very specific, they're looking at specific people, they're looking at specific injuries, they're, testing to kind of figure out, okay, what area of the brain is actually affected. And so they did a lot of neurological testing, and they found that like I had issues with my balance, I had issues with my autonomic system, I had issues with my ocular motor, meaning like I couldn't just like fixate on something. I couldn't, like, my gaze was all over the place. And then, like my cerebellar, which means that like, this test where you're like closing your eyes and you have to touch your nose, I kept missing. I would just hit to the left every time. I could not hit it if my life depended on it. So it gave them more information about like, okay, what part of her brain has been impacted? What are the things that we need to do to help remedy that? Like, what is the PT? So there was some of that, like, hey, we're going to ramp you up a little bit just to kind of see kind of what's your max, what's happening here. But then we're going to calm your whole system down. And by the way, we're going to give you a crap ton of tools to help you do that.
Nice.
Okay,
Yay.
brilliant. So it's just like a very different way to look at it. Like I think what was super interesting to me, they had me on this like table and they would tilt it back, but they would basically like start to lift the table up. And my heart rate, my resting heart rate was like what I think they said 72. And as they'd start to lift me up, because I couldn't figure out where I was in space. So if you like laid me down at that time, I was like, I have no concept of like what's around me or where I am. So they could tell that when the table was tilted and they started to bring me flat, my heart rate jumped up to 103 because my body was so disoriented and I was so disoriented that I couldn't figure out where I was in space. That was like a huge red flag for them. Like, oh, okay. So like these tests gave them all this like clarity of like, okay, these are the things we need to look at. This specifically, here's the PT that accompanies that. This might ramp you up a little bit. And here are all the tools, the supplements to help heal your brain while we're at it.
How long did you do the functional neurology for?
So they have a week-long intensive, which sounds like nothing, but basically that's all you do. You spend a week with them and you're there from 8 to 5. You have a break in the middle of the day and you're not as abused as I was like doing the other route. So you go in, and you do your PT and they kind of tweak it as the week goes on. And they have lasers that they use and they have all this like amazing technology to help, heal your brain too, right? It's not just like, let's just do some PT. It's like also let's heal the problem as best we can, right? Let's try to help you get back to like closer to your baseline.
Interesting. Wow. I think too of all different types of injuries, like where you're hit, how hard you're hit, and thinking of how many people are walking around with lost senses of smell or taste or balance. And we're just walking around expecting everybody to interact with us quickly and understand what we're saying or remember something. And so did you have that, like when you're out in the community or at the workplace or wherever, where people were noticing things were up with you that you actually didn't even know, like strangers at all?
Good question. Now I'm wondering. I'm like, yeah, we're there?
Well, I'm thinking too, I mean, you're a health coach and you have to be on your feet as a coach. Like you don't know what people are going to ask you. You don't know what they're going to tell you about their life. You have to think so fast as a health coach. And like they expect you to know things and then like also have compassion for them in a second when they tell you like their mom just died or something. So how was that too?
When I say like, oh, I couldn't do my job, it was a combination, right? Like I couldn't look at the screen because I couldn't handle the blue light, because that was a big one for me. Like the stimulation of the screen, like the blue light was really hard on me. So there was that, right? You're staring at a screen as you're like talking to people. It's constantly multitasking, as you guys know. But also like I can remember somebody, like you said, right? Like asking me something and I couldn't remember the answer or I couldn't, it's like I couldn't respond. I couldn't come up with the words to respond. And like that, some of that still lingers. Like I still have some of that. And mostly when I get really fatigued or really overstimulated, that's when that really comes out. Also, I really felt foggy. Like I just was like, I feel kind of like I'm not here. And I think some of that for me was like the adrenaline of the car accident. Like I didn't come out of fight or flight for 6 months. Like it was a long time before my body could like start to come down a little bit. Like it took a really, really long time. So I think that was also a little foggy, for me, like, is it just the brain or is it the combination of like the physical trauma I just went through? Yeah, it was weird for me, right? Like I didn't have a loss of consciousness. I didn't have headaches, which was also interesting. Like I never had headaches. but it was just that like those cognitive things that I was like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't have the answer anymore. I don't know.
Did the functional docs, did they like suggest you doing any chiropractic or massage or anything like that in the meantime?
I've been doing that. So post car accident, I stepped into all of that right away. I started doing acupuncture, massage therapy, chiropractic. I mean, probably 2 or 3 times a week, those different modalities. Like I did that right out of the gate. And that stuck with me. It still sticks with me. Like that's something that I still use. I don't remember them specifically recommending that, but I was also already doing it. So
I remember seeing your back that you were cupping. It was the first time I'd ever seen that. I'm like, what happened to you? What in the world? And then you had to explain it to me like I was a kindergartner because I was like, wait, what? And I think I don't know if you showed me a picture, if I Googled it after that, but it's pretty trippy. What's the cupping do?
I mean, it's helping to
Break
move
up
toxins out and break up. Yeah, exactly. Break up fascia, get the blood moving, get the blood stimulated in that area. So there was like, it's like you basically get hit by an octopus, you know, like there's just like these big circles on your back.
But when you don't feel well, like you will do anything. Make
Literally.
me look like an octopus, front and back, head and toe. Like,
Yes.
I will stick coffee up my butt. I will literally do whatever to feel normal again, to not feel foggy. And like, unless you have to go through it, you don't know these things. Like cupping is the perfect example of, no, like this is actually a healing technique that's been around for years and years and years and years. But until you have to do it, same thing for acupuncture, you know, until I did it, I was like, this is weird. I'm putting needles in my body, but all right, let's do it. I'm curious how you felt after the week of the treatment that you were talking about.
It was like night and day.
Yeah.
So I think what I would take away the most from that experience was the validation I didn't get previously, right? Like, I think it was finally somebody looking at me and saying, you're not crazy, by the way. Like, this is all really real. And when I hit the functional neurology route, I was 3 years out of my accident. It wasn't like a year. It wasn't like 3 weeks, it was 3 years before I finally found them. So that tells you, right? Like I'm 3 years down the road and still suffering, right? And still going, this can't be my life. Like this can't be my quality of life. Like this can't be true. Like it can't be that I can't get back to my life. And I will say, like, there are still things that I can't do in the same way, right? But I would say when I walked out of there, I think the validation was huge for me, but also having like real live concrete tools. Like, here are your exercises. Here are, if you're feeling this, here's your thing to do. Here's your tool for this. Here's a supplement that's gonna, that will help your brain actually heal. Have you heard of blah, blah, blah? Have you done magnesium? Are you on fish oils? Are you, it's like all these things that they were addressing, like actually helping me heal and get better versus, hey, this is just kind of it. You're good.
Leaving you hanging, leaving you isolated. I keep thinking of the isolation of this, right? Because it's your own experience. It's your own injury. You're the one that got hit. You're the only one in the car. You're the one going to the doctor appointments. Like, I've had this experience with Brooke where we've gone to the same doctor and it's been night and day because I fall under the umbrella of everybody else with the questions everybody else has. And Brooke's are different, and she is just gaslighted, and it's maddening because it's just a gap. It's a gap in care, and it's tough. And I'm so happy that route was there for you. And so I'm curious, since then, so that's 2019 that you get this help and you have these tools. So was it just like basically a practice now for you to keep doing them, or where are you at with that?
Some of them, as life happens, right? Like add a marriage and 2 kids and your life shifts a little bit. Some of those things might go by the wayside a little bit. But, like there's things that I still know I need, right? So I know I need 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night, right? So I have a 3-month-old baby. Ask me how that's going. Like, I have a 2-year-old and a 3-month-old. So it's tough, but like, these are the things I still know, right? I know that I still need to take high doses of fish oil. Like, I know that. As time has gone on, I've realized that magnesium doesn't work for me, right? So there's like these things that I've kind of, you like sift it out, right, as you go. I still know that like I need to move my body every day. It's not at the same level of intensity that I used to, right? But I know that I need to take frequent breaks throughout the day and walk away from the screen and, do a reset. And a reset for me is literally just like closing my eyes. Like, I literally need to close my eyes and take deep breaths. And that can be enough to calm my brain enough that I kind of get like, I call it like pushing the reset button, right? So instead of like my day escalating, like I had to take time throughout the day to like, okay, and reset and bring her back down and push the reset button and bring her back down. Otherwise, it's really easy for me, like especially working with a screen or just the craziness of life. It's easy to get like really ramped up still, right? So I have to like come back to, okay, take a deep breath. Okay, get out and move. Okay, turn off the screens, like I have very specific, I have lenses that are called Eisen lenses and they block the blue light. But I got those right after my accident and I have to wear these. Otherwise I get so overstimulated. So it's just like learning, like, what are my tools now? What are the things I really have to stick with,
Mm-hmm. It sounds, other than the glasses and specific things, but a lot of it is like the basics, right? Sleep, stress management, like not having a screen, going back to how it was in the old days. And that's what I found too, is like putting your body in these conditions where it can heal, where it can get back to how, almost like how it knows what to do, how to take care of you. And so as you're saying that, that's what I'm hearing. But during this process, like you're in fight or flight because you're also frustrated and you're not getting these answers. So I'm curious, what helped you stay so resilient throughout this and to keep advocating for yourself when you did feel off?
Great question.
Thank you.
I will be very honest. There's all sides to it, right? Like I knew it couldn't be it. And I knew just within myself that like, I didn't want it to be it. Right. And so I think there was that. There's a very real mental health aspect to brain injury. First of all, it's isolating. Second of all, people don't understand it, right? Like, how is it possible that you're 6 years out from an injury and you're still suffering? That's literally impossible. Like, you did these things, right? So I think the depression is really real because I know it's really real. I don't think I know, because when you're in it, it's hard to see the forward progress, right? It's hard to go like, today's better than it was last week, right? Like you if you're not consciously looking at it and not consciously going, okay, so this is different, or this has improved, or grieving what's different because that's your new reality. Like, I think there's all sides to it. Like what helped me push forward was, I think, long story short, is like, this can't be possible. But in that, I had to marry that with a very real grieving process, because there are very much two sides to that.
Oh, man. So with this grieving process, I'm curious, thinking of the people closest to you. Are they noticing things and talking to you about it? Are you aware of what they're noticing? Are they talking to you about that? Like your parents, your close friends or partners?
What's interesting is that like my close friends really noticed. And I don't know if that's just because of the field that I've been in, so we're very like keen and aware, and we're very like, we know people, right? We know like the ins and outs of people. And so it's very easy to pinpoint like, that is different about that person, or that has changed. And so I think when you work in the kind of field that we have and do work in, it's very easy to see that in others. My family, I think they just didn't get it, like it's not their fault, but they couldn't understand how it was affecting me. You know, they couldn't understand that this like was a thing that's, you know, again, 6 years down the road and there's still pieces that are affecting me. Right. So it's not their fault, but I think they just didn't know. They'd never experienced it before personally, but also like no one in their world had either. So there was like no frame of reference to understand like the complexities of it. And I think there did come a point where I stopped talking about it with them, because I think you start to question, like, am I nuts? Am I crazy? Like, is this really real? Or am I just like, I don't know, why am I having such a hard, and then you question, right? Like, why am I having such a hard time? Like, why is this so hard for me? And so I think that's why you need your people that have been through it. Like, you need your community. You need to find your people, because it's like with like, right? Sometimes we need that just to like be validated, be like, okay, I'm not totally nuts. That's a real thing. Got it.
Yeah, I also think when you talk to people like your family or people who don't understand it, it makes it even more isolating because of exactly what you said. You're like, am I crazy? Am I the outcast? Like, am I playing the victim card? Should it be this way?
How are my own people not understanding what I'm saying, the people I'm closest to?
And it's the energy that you don't have of explaining it. And then in return of trying to explain it. Yeah, I can totally relate to that. This support is so important, and you found your support in a community. So how did you find that?
Desperation. So I think it took me a long time to find that. And I don't really know why, because I'm very much a person that's like, okay, let's like figure out the thing, do the thing. I think after I got the validation of like, hey, by the way, this is real. What you're experiencing is real. That's when I started to seek out support groups. Minnesota does a really good job. There's the Minnesota Brain Injury Alliance, and they have tons of resources for survivors. They have support groups. They have support groups for families and friends that are trying to support people through it. So I think, you know, I don't know what every state looks like, but there are resources out there. There are support groups. There's online, you know, there's like Facebook groups where you can join. And so there's just it is out there. And I think, again, I go back to this word like validation, but it was so important for me to like get validated and realize that like, oh, I'm not the only person who suffers in this way and for so long. Like, there are many people out there who are quote unquote worse off, or it's different, right? Because it's so individualized. It was just refreshing to realize I wasn't nuts.
Yeah. Something I noticed too is not just doing the work that I do and always learning is the human need for connection, right? To belong. And when you can't relate to the people around you, or they can't relate to what you're going through, it's like that human need is taken away. And so I think that's why support is so important. That's been my personal experience.
Yeah, I keep thinking about people that have undiagnosed TBIs. So how do you know if you have a traumatic brain injury, right? You're walking around and you're noticing different things about yourself, you know? And I also think about, what if you can't afford all of these things?
Yeah.
So I feel like there's a lot in the question I'm asking you, but one, how do you know if you have one, and what are you supposed to do if you have no money to do anything about it?
Yeah.
Where do you start?
You know, there's lots of signs and symptoms of TBI, right? So we think about the obvious, right? We think about the football player, or we think about, you know, the person who fell and slammed their head on the ice, right? So like, those are like, we're like, yes, that makes sense to me. Like, you hit your head, right? So I think when it becomes challenging is you think about like, yep, okay, loss of consciousness, or I feel dizzy, or I have these headaches, but you don't think about things like you said, right? The loss of taste and smell, or, hey, I'm really sensitive to light, or, hey, I don't sleep very well. Like my sleep is constantly disturbed, or I'm really irritable all the time. You know, like, these could be 1,000 things, right? So you're like, well, it's probably because I'm menopausal, or it's probably because I just didn't get enough sleep last night. Or so you start to tell yourself these stories. So like, how do you, is it hard to decipher? Yes, it can be very challenging to be like, hey, I did hit my head, or like, like this happened. This is the one I hear a lot, right? Like, oh, I fell off that swing when I was 10 and I'm, 28. And I'm like, okay, well, do you have this, and this? Yeah, I do sort of have that. Huh. Do you feel like that changed after you fell off that swing at 10? Yeah. You can still get care. You can still start to repair that, right? Like like I stood up in my stroller when I was 3 years old and fell on my face. Did I have a concussion then? I don't know. Did the second one just like cause more because maybe it was a second one and I thought it was a first one? Like these are the stories that I hear all the time. Like, oh, I did that thing, like I fell off a horse, and you just don't think, because if somebody doesn't stop you and say, hey, you should probably be assessed for a brain injury, oftentimes you're not gonna be, right? So it's those weird things that are less obvious. Although like for me sitting in my shoes now and hearing the stories, it's obvious. So what I would say to you is like, if you can think of any sort of trauma, if you can think about like, hey, my personality changed at 10 when I fell off that bike or whatever, that's a red flag for you, right? That's like, hey, I remember like I started dealing with depression then. Red flag, right? So I guess what I would say is like, first of all, it's never too late. You can always get care. There's still a place and a time to like start to reverse that and work on that. You can go to a neuropsychologist. I guess is what I would say is start with your PCP. Start with your primary. If you get nowhere, which you may not, especially if it's an old injury, a neuropsychologist will at least start to assess, right? And start to look at like, they'll have you do the impact test, which could help inform some of the things that are going on. That can be like a more traditional route. Like if you're looking for those things to get covered by insurance, oftentimes they will. The functional neurology route is going to be more specific, right? And I think there's going to be more empathy and compassion for those old injuries, which is something you might not find on the other side. Like you might not find that in Western medicine as much, right? This understanding of like, hey, we can have that injury for 20 years and we can start to deal with that. I think you're going to find more success, looking at it from a functional perspective.
Yeah. And I'm thinking though, just when you were listing off all the things that you were doing, I was thinking, man, that had to have been so expensive. And so was any of the like acupuncture, massage, cupping, functional therapy, like was any of that covered by insurance?
So my case is a little different because I was in a car accident, which means there was a giant claim and we did go after the other guy. I did have a whole lawsuit. And for me, the lawsuit was like, I need to be covered for these things that have changed my life, right? Like, it wasn't like I'm mad at you and I want to make your life miserable. It was hey, I'm really suffering here from this thing that happened, right? So, my case was a little bit different because all of that was covered in my car accident, right? But a lot of those things could and can get covered by insurance. The functional neurology route was not covered. That was something I had to pay for out of pocket.
Wow.
And it was expensive, very expensive.
And it's the thing that helped. That's what stinks.
And it's the thing that helped. Yep. And so, I think I remember being in the thick of it and it was so overwhelming, right? Like all the appointments and all the therapies that are helping me. Yes, they are helping, right? They are helping. And it's also, it can coexist with, it's totally overwhelming, like there can be both. And so I think if you're somebody out there that's like, I think that might be me, like, oh, I feel like I need some support, pick your battles, right? So find one thing, right? So for me, I remember the one consistent, even in the midst of like all the appointments and all the therapies and all the things I was doing, I was constantly doing yoga. I was showing up to the yoga studio down the block, whether I was laying on the mat, crying my eyes out or not. What I would say to you is find your North Star, right? Like find your thing that gives you a little relief and just kind of stick with that for a while, right? Like don't get caught up in the whole thing. Don't do all the things at one time. Just like find one, start with that, like see if you get some relief. If you don't, continue to go, and explore, because it is, as much as it can be helpful, it can be really a lot. And so in an effort to like, where am I going to best spend my dollar? Just kind of like explore for a while, like try one of these and try one of these. And, just kind of like dabble until you kind of go, oh, when I did acupuncture that day, that really helped. Or, oh, you'll start to realize where and how your body responds. Like for me, like I said, right, I realized down the road, magnesium doesn't work for me. So like you start to learn those things as you go.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that because I can definitely relate. I think with functional medicine, there's so many things you can try and you get super excited about it and you can go down a rabbit hole and there is no like ending. It's, oh, try this supplement or do this or this alternative practice. So I really like what you said about just try something, and also knowing that it's not going to be an overnight thing, that it is almost like a lifelong practice and you start to build what works for you. I think for me, like going slow, something I wish I would have done. I mean, it is what it is now, and I'm glad I did what I did, but it is very overwhelming, and that stress of it being overwhelming is not helping.
Exactly. Yep. And I just remember being in the like middle of all the appointments, and it was me, right? At that point I was single. I was living alone. My family was close by, but I wasn't asking for their support. I didn't have the wherewithal to realize that I needed probably somebody to attend all that with me, to like take the notes, to help me comprehend what was actually happening. So I think when I go back and look at the constant, it was, I was doing all these things, and the yoga was the thing that I constantly went back to, like that was my, like I said, my North Star.
So now you're married, 2 kids. It's not just you. It's still kind of affecting you, but you have these practices. I'm curious kind of how your TBI affects you now. Where are you at with that?
Like I was telling you guys when I signed on, like I always have lots of notes because I can't remember. Like I can't remember like I could, or like things escape me. Like that still is very real. I still struggle with auditioning. I don't audition nearly as much as I used to because it's hard for me to think on my feet like I used to, be as quick as I used to be. And there's a very real demand in that industry for that. So, that has changed. I still fatigue very easily. I would say that is the biggest piece. Like if I don't get my sleep, all bets are off. Like I am non-functioning. And it's funny, somebody asked me recently, like, what does non-functioning mean? I'm like, oh, good question. I can't do my day. Like I'm just like in a fog, the fatigue is a big one. Screens are hard for me. That's still really hard for me to sit and look at a screen all day. I think that's hard for most of us. But
right. But then also in the midst of a pandemic where like everybody's remote and our lives are on our phones and computers, that's gotta be so challenging.
Yeah. Which is why I like rely on certain lenses for my glasses. I'm like, after this, I'll have to like step away and take a few deep breaths to like kind of because I can feel it, right? Like I can start to feel as this has gone on, like my system gets ramped up, right? And I can feel that like I start to get a headache. So like that was never a sign that I had early on, but it's something that tells me now that like, okay, you've been looking at a screen too long, it's that, it's not something different. But I haven't been able to resume workouts in the same intensity that I used to, like that. I did a lot of CrossFit. I did a lot of weightlifting. I did, really intense long days of yoga. Like I did my yoga certification. I did all these things that I feel like I think that's where the morning comes in for me, is that it was such a huge part of my identity, like being an actor and like being a health coach and like being physically active, and realizing that has changed for me, and that it's not, yes, I can still move my body, and I'm grateful for that. And also there are limitations on that now.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I feel for you, Kelly. I feel like it's a lot to have your identity have to shift when you didn't choose it. You know, you didn't ask for someone to not be paying attention. It's heartbreaking to think about what this has done to your life. And obviously you have beautiful kids and family, and you're, you know, living your life and thriving, but it's different. And you've had to go through so much because of one careless mistake. And so shout out to everybody that has a cell phone in a car and driving, or who's super tired and driving. Like, it's just not worth it. It's totally not worth it to put someone through what you've been through. And I'm so happy that you fought for your well-being, right? You know, some people don't bounce back the way that you have by pushing for their well-being and going to the intensive therapy and then saying this isn't working for me. Some people are like, okay, yeah, it worked. And they're just miserable.
And they sit with that instead of continuing to fight as hard as it is. You're a badass. I hope you know that.
I was really, I was really sad and angry for a long time. That was definitely part of this journey. Like, I was really sad and really angry for a long time, because it's just like you said, right? Like, I didn't ask for this. Like, this is not my life. This is not real. Like, this is not what's happening to me. And I think that's one of the things, if you can find the silver lining, and I can look at it now, right? Like, hindsight's always 20/20. And there are things that I can look back on and go, oh, okay, this thing, it would never happen. This thing would have never happened. If my life was so on the go. It was so overfull all the time that if I literally did not get hit by life, I wouldn't have slowed down. Like, I literally needed something to hit me, right? To get me to stop and calm down enough to, I don't know, potentially meet my husband, right? Like, I was like, oh, I want to meet my husband and have kids, but there was nothing in my life that was creating any space for that, So what's the, hindsight's like, oh, if that had not slowed me down, I would have these things would never have happened.
Wow.
That's beautiful that you're now at that point where you can look at that, because I'm sure for the longest time that wasn't even a part of what you thought about. So I think to anyone listening who is in the midst of fighting for answers, fighting just to feel like themselves, knowing that although there may not be light at the end of the tunnel, there is hope. And that there is always some sort of relief, some sort of answer, and you can find it. And it's that belief of continuing to push yourself to find the right practitioners, the right supplements, the right practices. I think it can be overwhelming, like we're saying, but it also is empowering to know there's so many different things to try. And when you have your community, you have those people that have done different things. And so they show you it is possible. And those days where you need some hope, you have people to lean on. So I hope that people listening who are in that's what they take away from this conversation. And thank you for sharing and being vulnerable and helping so many people that are listening. I know I'm inspired. I can't relate to what you're going through as far as the traumatic brain injury, but the invisible illness piece, I relate a lot to what you're saying. And I just want to thank you for being open and vulnerable. It's going to help a lot of people. It's helping me.
Thanks for having me. I was telling Andrea, I was telling both of you, I love to, it's a weird thing to say, I love to talk about this. I'm not on a soapbox and I don't have a platform or whatever, but any opportunity I have to talk about it, I do, because it's so real. It's so legitimate. And it's so, I think, it's not talked about a lot, because I think, like I said earlier, we don't always have the language. We don't always it's hard to decipher what's really happening sometimes.
Right. But it's also so prevalent. Like we were looking at statistics, we were blown away. It's unbelievable. And so it's like that. You never know what battle people are fighting. It's so true. There's so many people walking around with undiagnosed TBIs or diagnosed ones or ones that happened years ago. And we have no idea because you look completely normal. And so it's another one of those pieces just to give people compassion. You have no idea what's going on with people, whether they've had a TBI or not. You know, it's just another one of those truths to consider, that you really have no idea what battles people are fighting just by looking at them.
I'm thinking too about people who are listening, right? Giving them some takeaways, some action steps. These are where our 3 gold stars come into play. And so Kelly would love to hear what your 3 gold stars are.
Yeah. So I have 2 sets of 3 gold stars. So I have 3 gold stars for the support person, right? If you're somebody out there that's listening and you're like, I don't know how to support, I've got 3 for that. And then I've got 3 for survivors. So I'll start with our support. So if you're out there and you're like, I just don't know, I want to be a support. I want to, I know this person in my life who has had one, or I think maybe this person could have had one. Here are the 3 things I would say to you. And I remember like yesterday, right? So the first one I would say to you is believe them. Whatever their experience is, whatever they're saying to you, believe them. Take it verbatim. Take it as a source of truth. Validate their experience. Believe what they're telling you. 1. 2, attend their appointments. If you can be that person that can show up for them in that way, show up, take notes. I didn't do that. And I really wish I had. I really wish I'd had somebody who was sitting with me, like helping me decipher what was happening. Because when you're in it, it's a lot. And, you probably go home with like 10% of like all the things that were said to you. So if you can be that person that shows up for the appointments and take notes, it's amazing. And the third piece I very vividly remember is be steadfast. And what I mean by that is don't give up on them, right? So there's going to be coffee dates canceled. There's going to be, nights out canceled. There's going to be times where they just want to crawl in their bed and not leave their house, right? There's going to be times where they're going to say no. And there's going to be a lot of them. They're going to say no to you a lot, probably. Don't give up. They don't mean it. They don't want to say no. It's not personal. Do know when we're on the other end, when we're the survivor, it's like, if you keep reaching out, it's like the best thing ever. So be steadfast. Please don't give up. They will come around. And then if you're a survivor, right, take those breaks that I mentioned earlier. We know that deep breathing, right? So I talked about closing my eyes, taking a deep breath into our belly. How do you know if we're successful? The belly expands. We tap into our parasympathetic system. That's our rest and digest system. When I talked about the reset button, that's your reset button, right? Taking that deep breath. The second piece, mark your improvement. So if you're early on in this injury, weekly, okay, last week I couldn't sit behind my screen for more than 2 minutes. This week I've got 4, right? Whatever that is, mark your improvement. Like if you're years out of the injury, look at it monthly or look at it annually and say to yourself, hey, this is different. Last year I couldn't do that 5K and this year I can, right? So mark that improvement, take note, remind yourself that there is progress happening, because like I've said, there's a very real mental health component to this. And if you don't feel like you're fighting depression, you're different. And it can be a real challenging mental health battle. So mark your improvement. And then the third piece I would say is feel it all. Be mad, be sad, mourn the loss, right? I mentioned this earlier, but like the mourning that comes with you're different, right? You come out of something like this different, changed. Like I say that all the time, like I am not who I was 6 years ago. And there's been a mourning process in that. And, but I have moments, like I mentioned earlier, where I can find the silver lining. And I can look at it and go, oh, so these things probably never would have happened if I couldn't, look back in hindsight. But be as mad and sad and angry as long as you need to, and know that there will come a time where you can go, okay, I'm still mad and sad about things, and also I grieved it, and also like there's some good in it too, I guess.
Love those. Those are beautiful. And feeling the feels. Brooke is feeling.
I'm bawling over here.
Brooke is feeling the feels. I'm just curious what's going on with you over here. I mean, I'm sure I have an idea.
It's just not what people talk about. When you're... Sorry. I think you're just speaking to exactly what I wish I had. And I'm picturing people listening that are really, really struggling. Although to you and to me, like, we live this, but if we had these things in the midst, how much things would change. If you had someone to go to your appointments with, I think about when I would tell Andrea, like, about my appointments. I couldn't even begin to explain it, right? I think I need some more sleep.
Let it out. Kelly said feel the feels. All the feels.
Yeah. No, I think it's just really powerful what you're saying. And it's not hard to do, whether you're support. And it shows that it does change you. And it's mourning and it's grieving. And it's some heavy ass shit. And we need to be more compassionate to people. That's all.
And it's powerful too when you were saying believe them. Like, why wouldn't you believe someone? Why would you dismiss someone that nobody wants to feel that way? It's powerful. Yeah, your gold stars were beautiful. Thank you for those. So now we have 3 more questions for you. Unleashing Ivy. My question is around identity. And, you had to grieve lots of things. But since this, what is something now that's part of your identity that wasn't before? I'm curious.
It's a really good question. I feel very stumped in this moment. So I think I've always been, most of my life, pretty driven, right? Like, I've been pretty forward thinking, always going after the goal, doing the thing, whatever it was. And I think what's part of my identity now is an aspect of chill and realizing how much benefit there is also in maybe not chasing the goal sometimes, like how much there can be to just being, right? So like my identity, I was a doer and I was a go getter and did the things, right? And so I think, having kids at this phase in my life, it's different for me now, right? I never thought that I'd just be okay with being. And I do think that the accident changed that for me, because I had to learn and get real comfortable with being for a long time, because I couldn't do the do, right? It wasn't, my body said, no, you don't get to do you don't get to. And so I think that is definitely something that's new for me. It's like, oh, I can just like chill and just kind of be. I didn't know how to do that before.
Yeah, I love that.
Oh, I love that too. My question is around mental health. We talked a lot about it. And I'm curious during this and now how you supported your mental health.
Yeah. Lots of therapy. I did some cognitive behavioral therapy, some EMDR, and now I'm doing a lot of somatic therapy. So like working with a somatic practitioner who helps me get into my body, right? So it's really easy to get heady, which even with a brain injury, it's really easy to have your like brain try to take over. And working with a somatic practitioner for me has been getting into my body, because my body's actually always been the source of truth, not my brain, right? So that's been huge for me. I think EMDR is really effective for anybody who's encountered any sort of trauma.
Can you explain what it is?
It's kind of like going back into that trauma slowly. You're kind of like slowly going back into that trauma. But you know what? I've had just as much success with somatic therapy. Like I've gone back into that trauma in my body kind of finding, where am I feeling sensation? It's not about like finding stuff per se, right? It's more like, where's the sensation and what is that sensation trying to tell me? And there's always a story there, right? There's something that's going to unfold, but there's so many different avenues in regard to mental health, and like medication is a really great tool, like it's something that can really be a helpful tool. And I would, 6 years ago would never say that, but it can be a tool in the toolkit, right? In regard to your mental health.
Beautiful. All right. Last question. What is one thing you wish you would have known sooner?
In regard to anything in life?
Anything at all.
What is one thing I would have known sooner? Man. I feel like when I think about that question, I think about regrets, right? Like, oh, what do I regret? Or what do I, wish were different? Or what do I wish I had known? I don't feel like there's something I wish I would have known, or something that I wish somebody told me sooner. I feel like in my almost 40 years, turned 40 this year, I can look back and be like, no, that made sense. Like how that all unfolded. Like I wouldn't do it differently. I don't wish I knew that. I'm glad that it unfolded like it did. Is that a cop-out answer?
Not at all.
That's my favorite answer.
Yeah, I don't really have something that I wish, like, oh, I wish I knew that would have changed the trajectory for me. Because I don't think anything would have really been different.
Yeah. It's always interesting too when people have been through really hard things when they say that. It's really powerful because it just shows you how resilient people are. And just, you're such a strong force, Kelly, where I'm sure so many times you didn't feel like that when you're in the midst of it. I'm sure you felt weak, and I'm sure you felt a lot of things that weren't strong and resilient in the midst of it. But the fact that you can look back and not wish anything else, and how your life lined up now, it's just, it's really powerful. So thank you again for sharing your story and taking time with us when you have sleep to get and baby boys that take so much energy, especially when they're 3 months old too, and a toddler.
Yeah, 2 boys, y'all. Jeez, pray for me.
Oh my gosh, you need that extra self-care.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
Good Lord. Well, Kelly, we leave every episode with a piece of gold. Would you like to share your gold with us?
So the quote that I had was, brain injuries are like snowflakes and fingerprints. Everyone is different. And that's not like this like inspirational thing, but it's just like a reminder when you're like, oh, but this person didn't experience that. Like, it doesn't matter. They're all different. All different.
This is Gold Ivy signing off.
Listen to your truth and go chase your gold.